All I did was plant a few flowers in my front yard. I didn't break any laws. I didn't hurt anyone. But the HOA decided I was an enemy and threatened me with a $1,000 fine. They thought I'd back down. They thought they could bully me. But they forgot one thing. I know how to fight back, and I don't play by their rules. It started on a sunny Saturday morning. One of those peaceful days where time feels slower and the world seems to smile at you. Birds chirped from the rooftops, and the smell of fresh-cut grass drifted through the air. I had just brewed a cup of coffee and stepped out onto my porch, barefoot, mug in hand, breathing in the scent of the morning like it was some kind of life elixir. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 5 years, and that front porch was my little slice of heaven. But something had been bothering me for months. My front yard, or more precisely, its lack of color. Everything in this neighborhood looked the same. Beige houses, green lawns, and the occasional American flag flapping gently in the wind. The uniformity was soul-sucking. It felt like the neighborhood had been designed not for people, but for robots who liked things neat, controlled, and utterly uninspired. That's when I made the decision. I was going to plant a garden. Not a massive one, just a small patch by the mailbox, maybe something along the front walk. Nothing too crazy. I didn't want to turn my home into a jungle, just add a splash of color and life. Tulips, I thought. Tulips always made me smile. And maybe a few lavender bushes. They smelled nice, looked classy, and didn't take much maintenance. Simple, clean, elegant. So, I spent the morning digging, planting, and arranging. I even added a charming wooden border to define the space. Felt good to work with my hands. With every shovelful of soil, I felt like I was reclaiming my own space, injecting a bit of me into the otherwise lifeless grid that was our suburb. Neighbors passed by and waved. Some even stopped to compliment the work. "Looks great," said Mrs. Patterson from across the street, her little dog tugging at the leash. Finally, someone's adding a little character to the place. That made me smile. By the end of the weekend, the transformation was complete. My garden wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful. I'd chosen a color pattern, purples and reds, with little white blossoms in between, that popped against the dull backdrop of beige siding and brick. It felt alive. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of my home. Then, 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope marked with our HOA's logo. I almost tossed it in the recycling, assuming it was another neighborhood update or reminder about trash days. But something about it made me pause. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just the weight of the envelope. Whatever it was, I opened it and felt my stomach drop. You are in violation of HOA landscaping guidelines. Remove unauthorized vegetation immediately or face a $1,000 fine. I read it again, then again. My eyes traced every word, looking for some kind of mistake. Was this a prank? Had I planted something toxic by accident? I flipped through the bylaws online, heart pounding faster with each page. There it was, vague wording, like it had been written by someone who hated plain language. Asterisk front-facing yards must comply with approved landscape aesthetics to preserve neighborhood uniformity. Asterisk. What the hell did that even mean? There was no mention of specific plants. No clear list. No chart. Just this foggy cloud of bureaucratic nonsense. I scrolled further, looking for clarity, but found nothing helpful. Still, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I figured it had to be a misunderstanding. I drafted a polite email to the HOA board, attaching a few photos of my garden, pointing out that the plants were low maintenance, not obstructive, and even seemed to be appreciated by other residents. 3 days later, I got a reply. Not from a person, not even signed by a board member. Just a cold, automated response. Thank you for your inquiry. As previously stated, your garden is not compliant with neighborhood standards. Please remove all unapproved elements by the deadline to avoid penalty. That's when the anger began to bubble. I wasn't some teenager sneaking a bonfire in the backyard. I was a homeowner. I paid dues. I paid taxes. I lived here. Who were these people to tell me that a few tulips were a threat to the fabric of the community? I paced my living room, letter in hand, furious. Then, something shifted inside me. That subtle but unmistakable sense of rebellion. Of not just wanting to fix the situation, but to fight it. Not just to push back, but to make them pay for their arrogance. They wanted a war over flowers? Fine, let's go to war. From the moment I declared war on the HOA, I knew I had to be smart. This wasn't about shouting matches or angry posts on Facebook. This was about strategy. I wasn't just going to save my garden. I was going to expose the hypocrisy, the petty tyranny, and the shameless control-freak culture that had somehow rooted itself in our so-called peaceful community. Step 1 was simple: learn the enemy. I poured myself into the HOA documents like a college student cramming for finals. The bylaws were a labyrinth of lawyer speak and double talk. 147 pages of regulations, exceptions, and amendments. There were rules about flag sizes, acceptable shades of beige for house paint, and even restrictions on the height of basketball hoops. But it was the landscaping section that I obsessed over, dissecting every line. What I found both baffled and enraged me. There were no specific bans on tulips or lavender. The only restriction that could possibly apply was a vague guideline that landscaping must maintain visual harmony with the overall aesthetic. What aesthetic? The aesthetic of boredom? Of lifeless lawns and identical shrubs? The ambiguity wasn't just annoying, it was weaponized. The board could interpret it however they pleased. But I knew one thing. If I could challenge their interpretation using their own rules, I might have a chance. Buried deep in the document was a golden nugget. Homeowners had the right to file a formal appeal within 14 days of receiving a citation, and once filed, the board was obligated to respond in writing within 10 business days. It was a small window, but it was mine. I submitted the appeal that same night, drafting a clear, respectful, and very firm letter. I included photographs of the garden, highlighted the lack of specific violations, and demanded a formal hearing. Then I waited. 10 days passed. Nothing. No letter. No email. Not even a notice posted to my door. That's when I realized they weren't just unfair. They were lazy. They counted on people giving up. Most folks probably did. But not me. If they weren't going to follow their own rules, then I had no reason to either. And so began Operation Mirror. Give the HOA a taste of their own medicine. I began walking the neighborhood each evening with my phone in hand, pretending to be on a call while casually snapping photos. I wasn't interested in gossip, I was looking for violations. Specifically, their violations. I knew who was on the board. I'd seen them at meetings, walking their dogs, picking up packages. It didn't take long. One board member had solar-powered garden lights shaped like butterflies, clearly ornamental and not on any approved list. Another had a large ceramic frog next to her steps. Harmless? Sure, but technically non-compliant. And the HOA president? He had an entire string of hanging lanterns on his porch. Non-uniform fixtures, according to the lighting code. I documented everything. Dated, geotagged, categorized. I even created a spreadsheet. Then, anonymously, I submitted a series of formal complaints through the HOA's online violation portal. Each one worded like the notices they had sent to me. Dry, emotionless, but armed with precise citations. It didn't take long. 1 week later, the neighborhood message board lit up with subtle panic. The ceramic frog was gone. The butterfly lights disappeared. The hanging lanterns were nowhere to be seen. People whispered, confused and unsettled. And still, I had heard nothing back about my appeal. So I took it up a notch. I contacted a local gardening club and invited them to visit my home. They loved community features and often spotlighted homeowners in their newsletter. The club president was ecstatic about the invitation. They arrived with cameras, notepads, and a cheerful energy that felt like a middle finger to the HOA's soulless conformity. Photos of my garden ended up in the newsletter and their social media, which had thousands of followers. Comments flooded in praise, admiration, even questions about how others could start similar gardens. That same week, I received a second letter from the HOA. But this one was different. Upon further review, your garden has been deemed acceptable under current landscape guidelines. The previously issued fine has been rescinded. No further action is required. No apology. No acknowledgement of the appeal deadline they ignored. Just a quiet, bureaucratic retreat. But I didn't need their apology. Because I won. And more importantly, I'd shaken the foundation of their petty authority. They tried to bully me with their nonsense policies, but I buried them in their own hypocrisy. And every time I watered my tulips after that, I smiled. Because this wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a battlefield. And I had won it with roots, flowers, and facts. The HOA thought they had won. That their letter, their threats, and their stiff bureaucratic jargon would be enough to make me back down. But they underestimated one thing. I'm not someone who takes injustice lying down. Armed with everything I had uncovered in Chapter 2, every shady decision, every time they bent their own rules to serve a friend or favored neighbor, I was ready to strike. But I didn't want just revenge. I wanted change. I wanted to plant something deeper than tulips. I wanted to root out the rot at the core of our HOA. So I did what every smart rebel does. I went public. I created a website, HOAwatchdog.org. Catchy, right? I posted everything I had. Pictures of the garden, letters from the HOA, blurry scans of their vague bylaws, and, most importantly, the evidence I had gathered about their favoritism and misuse of funds. I kept everything anonymous at first, using a fake name. But the second day it went live, the site got shared in the neighborhood Facebook group. Then it exploded. Neighbors started commenting. At first it was cautious. I thought I was the only one. Or they fined me for a bird feeder once. But soon the floodgates opened. One family had been denied a fence for their autistic child, while another was granted one without inspection. Someone else had been harassed about a wreath on their door. Another about a basketball hoop. It wasn't just me. This was systemic. I organized a neighborhood meeting at the local library. To my surprise, nearly 24 people showed up. Some brought folders. Some brought their anger. One older gentleman, Mr. Jenkins, brought a list of every fine he'd received in the last 10 years. Over $3,000, he said, shaking with rage. And I never once got a real explanation. We decided to petition for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA board. It wasn't easy, bylaws are tricky, and the rules were stacked in favor of incumbents. But I'd done my homework. We needed signatures from at least 30% of the homeowners to force a special election. We got 40% in a week. The board tried to delay the process. They called it slander, said the documents were stolen, threatened to sue. But I knew the law. I wasn't just acting out of emotion. I had facts. I had neighbors. I had power. The special election came, and every single board member was voted out. The best part? I ran for president and won. The first thing I did? Rewrote the landscaping policy. Tulips? Approved. Lavender? Encouraged. Community gardens? Celebrated. But I didn't stop there. I created a garden grant program, $200 for any resident who wanted to beautify their space. Within months, our neighborhood transformed. People planted. Bees came back. Birds sang louder. It wasn't just beautiful, it felt alive. And that $1,000 fine they tried to slap me with? I framed it. It hangs right above my porch garden now. A reminder that flowers can start revolutions. And that sometimes the sweetest revenge is a yard full of tulips.